Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. My name is Douglas Gabriel. I'm your host, and today, with Michael McKibben, my good friend, we are discussing a most amazing writ of mandamus that has been submitted to the Supreme Court, the Homeland Security, and other places, and he's going to correct some of the little errors that I made in my exuberance and my zealot presentation last night. His name is Christopher Strunk, and Christopher, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure, and I'm here to maybe correct. My biggest task is to keep people moralized. This is very difficult work. It's something that I don't advertise because a lot of it is so arcane. It makes people's eyes glaze over, and it creates cognitive dissonance. And as I say, that people have got to learn when given two choices, choose the third. That's a Brooklyn term. My rabbi said, always create a permanent record, if nothing else. So that's what this is, a permanent record. And that, fortunately, Mr. Duggan is the new clerk at the court. He was very polite. He sent the package back upstate where I live. But unfortunately, I'm down here doing errands and business in New York because of my running back and forth to D.C. So I'm 600 miles away from solving a problem. I've been at this since 1976. I'm not an attorney, nor is Bill Van Allen. And that we are friends with many attorneys, and that they're high-powered attorneys, and they support us in our NSA propria persona, which is a living being, private or self-represented, and that we are, best we can say is that we are outside of the box in terms of our relationship to the U.S. per se, and the emergency that we exist under. And we'd existed under an emergency, according to Frank Church and Charles Matthias, for the last 85 years. So that it's not helpful, really. You're not going to get what we've worked on now for close to 30 years in one reading on the first couple pages of that complaint that Tyler put up, or that writ. But that what we're doing though, is that the courts understand exactly what we're talking about. And I don't want to get into the fringe on the flag and all that business, but certainly you can understand maybe that there's an honorarium for having fringe on the flag in a courtroom, but you tell me why it's so honorable to have one in a bank. So that there's a reason for that, see, and I don't want to get into that necessarily unless you want to discuss it, but that goes into the first 5 pages of that schmagagan that Tyler put up on the website, and it's hard to read because there's so many footnotes. But what I'm doing now is preparing to go by train on Friday with a fresh, corrected emergency writ in paper, 8.5 by 11, which the only way you could do that other than making booklets is to be of the economic status that I'm in, and that's the way I'm doing it. So we are looking to get a order of a single judge, and we chose John Roberts to take a look at these things, and the clerk, Duggan, said quite clearly that all I have to do is correct certain things and get affidavits of this, that, and the other thing, and he wanted me to serve the Solicitor General. And and certainly John Roberts at one point was the Solicitor General. He understands how this all fits together. But let me get to the point here. I have until tomorrow afternoon to finish all of my gatherings and putting it together. And unfortunately, my landlord upstate has to open up the package that was sent back upstate. He's got to scan it in and send the pages down here, which has got to be part of the package I'm putting together here in Brooklyn. So, I've got a 600-mile round trip problem of logistics, which I'm handling, and no problem to do that. What we're doing is asking that the paper ballot around the country be preserved, so that there's an opportunity in each state for all of you listeners out there to challenge the chain of custody with the electronic software, that Michael has so beautifully put together in his research, and the whole connection in that. And that's all an exhibit. And Problem is, if I had to put it in a booklet form, I'd have to reduce the 8.5 by 11 page down into a booklet form, which is a typeset, and it's a real nightmare. So they don't take, Michael, you've done this before, so you know how difficult it is. So I'm doing this in an 8.5 by 11 format, back and front, with my necessary paperwork, which will be hand delivered to the Supreme Court by 2:00 on Friday. And there will be a single judge who would review it. I'm looking for an immediate order that is reasonable, that all paper ballots must be maintained. The problem is that there are 5 states who use DREs only. There are no paper ballots in 5 states: Delaware, New Jersey, South Carolina, Georgia, and there's one more, and off the top of my head, it's on the last exhibit online. But that was in, I think that was in that was in Statement of Fact 27, I believe, or in 28, where I'm asking that the court order those states under the provisional ballot of the HAVA, Help America to Vote Act, that they must provide a provisional ballot, and they've got to be given a heads up by Friday to get those 5 states to get them to have those. That by law they have to have the provisional ballot there, but that they've got to be given in no uncertain terms that those provisional ballots shall be the paper form that they will use in those 5 states, and they shall be preserved. So there's two components here. One is all paper ballots must be maintained, so they don't disappear. Oh, is it?
Chris, Pennsylvania's the other state.
Okay, and especially Pennsylvania. Yeah. So those 5 states got to be told no uncertain terms under HAVA, Help America to Vote Act, to have provisional ballots ready, and for Tuesday, and that can be done by Monday by order. But that the keeping all the paper ballots is an easy one, right? So that the counting and the tallying won't end for like a 5 or the 10-day period after the election. And the problem is that you've got to have those paper ballots to compare to the middleman's theft through the software that you so brilliantly explained, and so brilliant that James Miller so brilliantly delineated in his paperwork out in Washington State, which is embedded in my U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces structure. And by the way, I had 2 cases. I had one to protect the military ballots in 2016 that got docketed in the United States Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. And once it was docketed, then they reviewed it, and they said they had no jurisdiction over those states, right? Which is, you could argue then that they didn't. But now with Trump in, he's definitely given them jurisdiction. And something happened. And at the same time, I went in to take on General Miley, who was the head of the Army, for gross dereliction of duty on the mishandling of all of the banking structures, which he has oversight of over the last 85 years. The military, under the fringe flag, has oversight of the emergency. We are under an emergency. We have not returned to a full civilian limited republic. And that this is not fringe. The fringe on the flag is not Admiralty and Maritime. That's all BS. All the Navy ships have fringe on the flag. Anything out at sea has fringe on the flag.
Now, Chris,
but here,
that issue that you worked on has now become a public issue, where they found that the military votes during the last presidential election were completely manipulated because they were all digital.
I know they were. I went to court to get with a mandamus, and that court essentially said they had no jurisdiction, and they said that they had to be given jurisdiction. That was under Obama. Obama is an evil Indonesian. He never became an American citizen. I'm the one who spent 10 years doing this in court. I was before Judge Leon Lambert. I was before many other judges, and I was the one who discovered his name is Subarka. I got that. I was fighting Brennan personally. I fought him personally, and I teamed up with Michael Shrimpton, who had done DNA tests with Michael Flynn in the DIA. They had actually gotten the DNA test on Madeline Dunham at a dinner party with a chain of custody on the glass and her saliva in the water. The CIA and the DIA did that together. That's very seldom would I give the CIA any kudos, but
that's good work, because now we do know that Obama and his mom were in fact CIA agents, and that she did her work both in Kenya and in when she was going after Subud. And I don't know if you're a believer in this, but some say that Barry Soetoro is not the child of course, Barack Obama.
No, we knew that. We know that, and that the point is that he is of the Rama of Thailand, and we became aware of that on December 25th of last year, when Delta Force was sent in by a bankruptcy judge to seize all of Solyndра's holdings. Right? The only way that you can have a corporation in Thailand is to have a citizen of Thailand as the owner of the corporation. So that Delta Force went in, they found warm cups of coffee there. So the Rama issue, the whole thing in Thailand was set up by Prescott Bush in coordination with the Axis powers, the Japanese and the Germans. All right, and that the Rama, I believe the ninth Rama was Obama's father, who had gone to Harvard. Okay, and he grew up in Switzerland. And when the eighth Rama went down, he took over, and they transferred Obama, because patricide happens. You know, the various princes kill off each other, and so they transferred as a favor to the Bush family. They transferred Obama over through British Columbia, where the CIA had custody of the child. And that when Jerry Corsi did that work, when he interviewed the next door neighbor of Stanley Ann Dunham at the time that she was going to school, University of Washington, the neighbor said, this woman doesn't even know how to change diapers, and besides, this kid is well over a year old. Right? She got that. Jerry Corsi got that. So basically, she was given this child in order to safeguard the child for the Rama of Thailand. Now, you've never heard that story, right?
No, but that's why we're going to be interviewing you more. But hey, let's go back to John Roberts. You went after John Roberts, and now you have chosen him as the Supreme Court member to submit this to, and you have certain beliefs about John Roberts. You've actually had action taken against him, and you have a new belief about his new feelings because of Trump. What can you tell us about that?
Right. Well, I was the only one with under Uniform Commercial Code not to accept the offer of contract on noon January 20th of 2008, when Roberts, or rather 2009, when Roberts was so highly medicated that so he didn't have an epileptic fit, that screwed up his entire oath of office. And that Roberts has a terrible genetic bound epilepsy problem. So he screwed up the oath. Obama screwed it up, because I don't know, the guy's an idiot to begin with. But the point, though, is that they both screwed it up twice. And then, at the end of the day, they went to the Supreme Court offices and they swore him in when, I guess, the medication had worn off on Roberts. But Roberts had done through Opus Dei an adoption of 2 children, because he genetically would have passed on this epilepsy, which is a terrible curse. It's a terrible problem. And I don't know what they can do, maybe through genetic engineering, but epilepsy is a problem when you get married. And, he's an ardent Catholic, and he wanted children. We all want children. But the point is that he became very vulnerable. He had a control file on his questionable adoption with Opus Dei, where all the children were going to school, et cetera, and that he became vulnerable because of that, and they could control him. Now, he was told in no uncertain terms to essentially use the Tax Anti-Injunction Act, to overrule the Tax Anti-Injunction Act in order to call Obamacare a tax. And he was told in no uncertain terms that's what you're going to do, or you're going to lose your children, right? And of course, he went along with it. And that Monday following, he was given a round trip to Malta, where he was sworn in as a Knight of Malta, and he was given high kudos because, of course, AmeriCare is the Knights. It belongs to the Knights of Malta, and they had a windfall because of Obamacare, and that's AmeriCare. Check it out. But the point, though, is that when Trump came in, and my father worked with Fred Trump as an architect. They actually acquired close to 120 residential properties when they were under the Hill-Burton Act transforming the hospital system to serve Kennedy Airport. And that this was the end of the 50s. And that so my father was the architect for that, and he worked with Fred, who essentially donated money, et cetera, and he got to know Fred, a real gentleman. You know, he was, and certainly I know stories about Donald, which my father knows personally. He used to call him the juvenile delinquent, and I can tell you it's sort of interesting. You know, Donald is a street fighter. He's a real street fighter. He knows how to do things and get things done. But nonetheless, Donald came in, notwithstanding Democrat, Republican, left, right, all that's a bunch of crap. You know, that's just your Jesuit happy games, and that you know the Hegelian dialectic crap. So the point is that Donald worked with the military. He was told by the White Hats, "You're going to be president," and he said, "Great, let's do it." And that he was put in office through military White Hat intervention, and the whole problem with the software and everything else. You know, I think you did a great job, Michael, explaining how the White Hats had done the protecting of the bottom line. You know, in terms of the tallying of the votes. And all of this sort of fits together. It's been a continuous problem, which, as it turns out, since 93, 98, in Trust Inc. In Trust Inc. being the foreign interference. And that through the Privy Council, and I contend it was the British East India Company based in Singapore, and the whole issue of the Chinese and the post-World War I Versailles structure that all the Germans went to China, basically, okay, and that and all the Jesuits went with them. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, in particular, who worked with the Office of Naval Intelligence. I'm throwing a lot of stuff in here, but the point is that it's a very I can give you extreme detail and put you all to sleep, and that but I do know that John Roberts was told in no uncertain terms by Donald that his control file was wiped away as long as he had agreed to reinstitute rule of law. Now, rule of law it will eventually mean to reinstitute civil government. Okay, we've got to get rid of this 85-year military government, which is under the emergency, under the Aldrich-Vreeland Act, and then the McFadden Act in 1927, where all of your banks and your industry is run by the American Knights of Malta. You know that Cardinal Dolan essentially went against Francis I, the Jesuit, and he was working with all the American Knights of Malta are under Cardinal Dolan, and he at the Al Smith dinner made it quite clear to Trump that he was going to put the Knights of Malta firmly behind him in order to do what needed to be done to save the country. Dolan is one of the, I guess, Ozark people, or the Missouri people, and I think you can appreciate the Ozarks.
You're talking about me. I'm an Ozarkian.
Yep. Right. Well, so is Dolan, by the way, and Cardinal Dolan. So he has an American outlook, and he was a danger to the Jesuits in particular, and that's why they changed the head of the Knights of Malta, and Francis put in his own guy out of the old German Stay Behind network, the Gladio networks, which are actually running the Queen through, and she's a Dame of Malta. Dame of Malta pays fealty to the head of the Malta, and that's the man that was put in to replace Feisting. Feisting was the son of a commander of the British military.
And now the whole Curia is Jesuit. The Knights of Malta?
I think it is. I think we're in serious trouble.
The Jesuits. The Jesuits aren't even Catholic. They don't even believe in Jesus. They don't believe Jesus has even come. I used to be a Jesuit. That's the reason I can speak directly from it. I did the Manresa, and I got out because when I saw the corruption, it was just disturbing. And they run all these 20-some universities, which are propaganda machines. And Georgetown, which you were just mentioning, is such a hotbed of Jesuit manipulation and control. And Judge Leon, you mentioned, that's Podesta's good friend. They still teach a class together over in Georgetown. It's disgusting. Now, what I want to know from you, Chris,
he came out of Holy Cross, and the Jesuits were very tight with him at Suffolk University, or Suffolk. He is tight. Whitey Bulger just got done in. You saw that, right?
Yeah,
and
beautiful.
Of course, that's Mueller's. That was Mueller's man, right? And Whitey Bulger got done in by some. The patriarchs out of Providence were essentially had a truce, and Bulger broke the truce, and somebody poked his eyes out and snuffed him within. They brought him down, I think, into Pennsylvania or New Jersey to go into federal prison. But Mueller had him snuffed. Mueller is dirty.
Mueller's one of the worst. So, Chris, is there any hope for our fake justice system? You're there. You've been doing this for years.
There isn't.
But you fight the fight. Why are you fighting the fight if you don't believe that you can win?
I enjoy it. I think of myself as I was in the military, and I was during the Vietnam period from '66 through '72. I was all over the place. I was upper air. I was Ravensson in Air Force. I saw basically the world is round, and that it and that
you can prove it.
And I was.
It's funny.
Yeah, I could prove it. I sent out balloons that would stay up for 6 hours, right? And that we don't track it, and they go huge. They become as big as a 15-story house, right? A balloon, a latex balloon. And so the point, though, is that I drew conclusions of what the problem was with the CIA and everything else. I was in North Africa. I was in Turkey. I was in South America, and I was involved in the South Pacific skin diver program of the above ground, or the South Pacific testing, the force de frappe by the French, and the upper air testing in Bomex and in the Caribbean, when we were studying the relationship of the atmosphere to the bottom of the various trenches in the Caribbean. And so I got to see, and I was involved. My unit was involved in mapping the world with 707 platforms, taking pictures of Africa and South America. That was my unit out of Tinker Air Force Base. So, I got to see things, Doug and Michael, that most people don't get to see. And when I came back from the military, all the people I had gone to school with were, they were in SDS or the weathermen, or, they were doing all sorts of unbelievably unacceptable stuff, anti-war stuff. And of course, I was being tired of being called a baby killer, but you remember all that.
Oh,
so
yeah.
The point is that the thing is, when I look at the court system, I look at in the same way that Frank Church in '73 set up the Emergency Powers Act in '76, where it required the president, if you're going to continue on these emergencies, you've got to report it in the Federal Register, and you've got to actually dictate specifically what laws are being modified. So that right now I think we're under 24 emergencies, all right? And that it's stated to Congress that within 6 months of the issuing of a new emergency order, that they had to review it, and they could actually overrule it, right? Mm-hmm. Over every emergency. Otherwise, that the president would be the only one who could get rid of the emergency. And that was the Emergency Powers Act in '76. And that, of course, was supplemented by the International Economic Emergency Powers Act in '77. And this is all under Carter and Brzezinski and the Trilateral Commission. And Stansfield Turner, of course, being the man who wanted to bring all of the CIA people, the 4,000 CIA regular employees, into corporate structure. And that's where the SES comes in, right? They wanted to do what otherwise a government employee would go to jail for.
Oh, absolutely.
They wanted
The conversation you and I had before this, you nailed the history of the SES going back further than I even imagined, and we're going to have a conversation upon that, because really, it's the civil service. You pointed out, really,
under
the moment
Chester A. Arthur, right?
Yeah, 1912, and then 1913. That was it. We were sold
81,
away.
1881.
Oh yes, you went all the way back, but I'm talking about where you set it up, and then you showed how the U.S. Federal Reserve simply became the tool of what had already been envisioned and taken from the Brits and other places, and the British British East India Company, which I'm glad that you mentioned that. Now let's go back. If you don't think there's any salvation for the justice system, I know you just explained you're a fighter. You've seen all this evil. You've participated in it. You've seen the dichotomous political atmosphere in America. But why then did you get so inspired by the research, some of Michael's research and Americans of Innovation, some of our research, to take up this banner? And I think that what you're doing, whether it wins or not, whether it gets all the way in the docket, whether John Roberts does the right thing or not, it doesn't matter. We're going to get the court of public opinion awake to this. And if Michael Pence doesn't have his head in a hole in the ground, hopefully bringing this to the attention of the Supreme Court, the Homeland Security, and to his group, and to all these people that we're now spreading it to the whole world on, I think that is what needs to happen, so that the grassroots realize that it's their job to make sure this election is not, all elections are not rigged, and that we should do exactly what you've done, which is to take whatever action you can. You took legal action. Others have taken they do videos, they do presentations here or there, they replicate it, they write stories, so on and so forth. But what you did is what we're always applauding, because we are in a litigious system. We are in the shadow of Roman law, and I'm sure you can give us a great talk on that too, how these laws and the Vatican law and maritime law and all these things, the fringe and the flag you're talking about. But why are you fighting in that system? And was it really that you just looked at Michael's work and you got inspired? Because I know you guys have been chatting for a long time. So why are you working in the federal system, which I'd love for you to tell us your opinion about. In my opinion, there shouldn't even be these federal courts. There shouldn't be circuit court, federal circuit courts, federal appeal courts. I don't believe any of them should exist except a few of them in Washington, D.C. But you're working in the system. You've gotten results before. And I also want to know is what inspired you, and why is it you're working through a system you don't think that you can really change?
Well, on my father's side, we go back to 1756. We came over. We were tired of fighting Islamists in Europe, and we came over as farmers, and we went to Pennsylvania, and we gave our allegiance to the king. And we ended up in the revolution. And basically, we're free. We want free will. We came out of Baden-Baden, all right? And we want our free will as individuals. We don't want the collective. The collective is anathema. We were Church of the Brethren, right?
So, you must be kidding. The Unity Brethren, the church. I studied those guys. They're the best wisdom that came out of Europe. I was wondering if you might be connected to them.
Yeah, that's us, right? That's not me. I don't know what I am. I know God exists. I can prove it. And it's amazing stuff. I know God exists. That's the only sovereign. There are no sovereign citizens. I don't care what the monarchs say. I don't care what Francis I say. He's not sovereign. Right? He's not sovereign. God is sovereign, period. There are no, I call them patriots. The one where I'm sovereign, they beat their chest, and all this rest. That's just patriots. What we need is a nation, and I embrace Emir Vattel's Law of Nations, and the need after the treaty of after 1646, the Treaty of Westphalia, that a nation had a right to its borders, right? Has a right to its borders, and that we need an alert citizenry which will defend the borders in the revolution. In other words, the revolution must be continuous from one generation to another. It has been.
Amen.
It has been. It has been within my family. DAR, all that stuff. Right. So, and the same with Bill Van Allen. He goes back to the Green Mountain Boys in Vermont. So, it's important stuff.
So you've been Minutemen for a long time. You've been real patriots.
Actually, I was in 2005. I was Jim Gilchrist. Right? So, I had friends. I don't own a gun, but all my friends went down to Arizona. During that whole period. And with Jim Gilchrist. So I've got an attitude, Michael and Douglas. I've got an attitude. And the attitude is, this is my country. You need this in order to protect my rights. The government is a limited republic, and its only job is to protect me. That's its only job, is to protect me and my progeny, period. And there are 50 sovereign states, and it is a confederation of those sovereign states which has been taken away by this emergency structure that was set up by the Aldrich-Freeland Act, where the banks could pass paper amongst each other under an emergency condition as long as the emergency is maintained. I'm a good friend of Dr. Walker F. Todd, who is pretty reasonably well known, and he's a friend of mine.
I love that guy.
He's a friend of Bill Van Allen's. Yeah. So the point is that if we can, Trump is dedicated to stopping the emergency. He wants to reinstitute, and I think he's going to do it through the gold bond. He's going to issue a Treasury gold bond in order to save the pension funds. He's going to get the Federal Reserve out of their short selling and their naked short selling and their various machinations but we've got to protect the pension funds, and it's got to be put into gold bonds. And that's what Rickards was talking with Trump about October of last year. And that in terms of we've got to connect our pension funds to solidity, and that's what will save the country. Got to have a strong dollar, and that this Keynesian stuff has got to stop. But I can't discuss one without sort of wrapping it together, because Trump knows this stuff. See, he's sharp. I know exactly what's going on in his head, and that through my father's stories about him, about the juvenile delinquent, and that he's a smart guy. You don't build anything in New York unless you hire a Roy Cohn to bust the kneecaps. Okay, Jesuit trained up in Syracuse, and that Syracuse is where the Jesuits used to be in Dutchess County. When Pierre Teilhard de Chardin came back from putting Mao in 1949, he created the UN with the Roosevelts. He lived 3 blocks away from, which is where all the Jesuits live, in Manhattan, and they had their novitiate schooling up at Syracuse, right? So that's where Roy Cohn went. That's where Al D'Amato went. That's where a lot of other people who became the Jesuit tools went for New York State. Right. But that Trump does not like the Jesuits, man. He went to Fordham for 2 years, and he thought they were a bunch of nudniks. They're crazy. And, of course, Brennan stayed. He was crazy. He still is crazy.
Oh, Brennan. Let's not get started on him. So why did you take up the banner of elections? Was it because of Michael McKibben and his friends' research?
Oh, absolutely. I think anybody who's done that detailed work and is so logical has got to be given an avenue of moving forward. And that I'm using my experience in order to put his research in the works at the level where it needs to be. And that I thought it's great research. I was very excited about both your and Michael's research on this. And this SES it connects all the dots, Douglas. It connects all the dots.
Do you think the Miller Act can really topple? Do you think the Miller Act can really topple the Silicon Valley cardboard cutouts?
Under this military government, no. Under the military government. See, in 1935, when McShane, who was a big Knight of Malta out of Philadelphia, built the Pentagon, which was the largest building in the world. I think it's still the largest building in the world. It was put in place in order to be the war, would conduct global war. And that's what the Pentagon is. The hiding of Professor Skidmore out of Michigan, who Catherine Austin Fitz has worked with.
Oh yeah, I know him.
He discovered the 21 trillion off the books, you know, and that. But we have 52 trillion of actual debt, and Trump has to really fix that. He's got to fix it, and he's got to throw it into gold bonds into the future. We can't use gold or silver on a local, on a now basis.
Did you come up with that idea?
Well, I have a lot of interesting associates who, for instance, cryptocurrency. I have a case in the British Indian Ocean Territory. My associate is Jonathan Levy, who he's a barrister or a solicitor, and where the CIA is laundering all of their illicit money, it's off the book. Now, if you work within the banking system, cryptocurrency doesn't work. It's got to be outside of the banking system because they track everything. Cryptocurrency and the whole blockchain thing, and this is Michael's area. I mean, it's all phony baloney. And that when you transfer cryptocurrency into a bank, there is all sorts of bells and whistles. They want to check your ID. They want to know who you are, because once you bring cryptocurrency into the banking system, it just proves that cryptocurrency is outside the system. They're running all of these illicit, the child trafficking, terrorism, artifact, illicit sale of artifacts, body parts, drugs, guns, you name it. That's what is being done in conjunction with the CIA and Khashoggi in particular, and what's the guy, Mark Rich in particular. And that a long list of people in the British East India Company and the Privy Council, but the Chinese are up their eyeballs, run by the Germans. The old Versailles Treaty crowd that we fought in Korea, they were the ones flying planes against us in Korea. They were the ones flying planes against us from North Vietnam. It was the Nazis. It was the Foreign Legion people that were Nazis, part of the whole Gladio network that went for the organization of the Algerian Secret Army, right?
Absolutely.
But there is one place that I am going to go. I know if this doesn't work, and I expect that it will be properly docketed on Friday, and I expect that Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and Roberts and even the do-nothing Clarence Thomas, who went to Holy Cross, who was the Jesuits' feather in their cap, putting all this black man in the, a Holy Cross guy, blah, blah, blah. And whoever else wants to be the fifth vote, there's a fifth vote there. I know Sotomayor personally. I was before her 5 times at Second Circuit. I know all of the dirt on her. I know that she wouldn't have been there if it hadn't been for Joseph O'Hare out of Fordham. He gave her a free clearance on her background. In order, a free clearance, if you know. She came out of the New York City Campaign Finance Commission with Father O'Hare, right? So, look, I believe that the 5 judges will vote to reinstall rule of law. But if not, I'm going to go to the Organization of American States Court, called the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights. It's right there in D.C. It was set up at the end of the FDR administration through the good neighbor policy. You remember Carmen Miranda and the head full of fruit, right, and
sure,
dancing around and all that stuff, right? But that they set up it was almost an extension of the Monroe Doctrine. It was at the Western Hemisphere's sort of global defense against everybody else, and that so that the Jesuits are in there, but all the members of the Organization of American States are there, and they, unfortunately, that Reagan would not recognize any jurisdiction over the United States, but nonetheless, they're there in D.C. I intend, with bells on my shoes, to go there if, in fact, John Roberts doesn't, step up to the plate. And I have 6 months to do that. That I am going to throw them all the SCOTUS, and I'm going to tell them. I'm going to tell them in no uncertain terms that they're being watched very closely for whether or not they're going to continue on their piracy, and that's what they're involved with, is piracy. and that look, I want to defend the American Revolution, and certainly the Privy Council, all the stuff you stated, but it goes to Singapore, all right? It goes to the British East India Company. It goes to inside the Celestial Kingdom, which is run by the goddamn Germans, all right? They're in there with hand over fist. That's where Kissinger went in the 30s. He came out of Shanghai.
Well, look at Angela Merkel. She is the best representative of George Soros. Look at the deals with Russia for the Nord Stream oil. Look at the fact that she provided the ships along with George Soros and lied the whole time to bring the invasion into Europe. I mean, Germany just offered $400 million to Iran, even though there's sanctions. And when we threatened them, what did they do? Oh, we'll go through a third party. Nothing stops Germany. So tell me this. Do you think John Roberts will do the right thing?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, he is protected property by the Pentagon right now.
So basically then, Michael McKibben, there is a hope for the Miller Act. There is a hope. And what we're hearing Chris say is he knows the system, but he also knows that Trump has brought a change in the wind, and the rule of law is so unusual in Washington, D.C., especially in the court, that something may happen. Michael McKibben, do you think that we got a chance to move this forward? Because that's what Chris is saying he's doing for you. He's helping you move the ball forward.
I'm excited.
Chris identified God as the ultimate source of our power, so with God, anything is possible. Isn't that on our money? Or no, that's the motto of the state of Ohio, by the way.
Wow.
Well, in New York State, which started at the time of James I of England and James II of Scotland. It was the Jesuits came into New York State when the British overthrew Peter Stuyvesant and that crowd, right? And they brought in all the Jesuits. And what happened, though, is that New York State's Constitution said that we, the people, are grateful to Almighty God, right at the preamble of the state constitution. And the state of New York, the once Empire State, I don't think it's even the Empire State at this point, under Cuomo, who is essentially working with Jack Ma, who is essentially the Central Committee, Alabama. I noticed you brought up now he bought 28,000 acres. The Central Committee of China, the second largest language spoken in New York is Chinese. And that the point is that Andrew Cuomo is working with the Jesuits. And what I said to Judge Schmidt, who really liked me, a state Supreme Court justice, who never graduated high school and went to the Jerusalem University to get his law degree and came back. He was a Hasidic Orthodox, and when I told that in open court that we're grateful to the people of New York are grateful to Almighty God, and he said, well, and I said, and I asked him, do you know why? And he said, why? And I said, because your insurance companies, if they didn't recognize God, could not have acts of God.
I love it when a lawyer can prove God. You just proved God exists right there. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, and the whole court broke out laughing. All the attorneys and right. This is back.
You constantly crack me up, Chris. You constantly crack me up. Yeah. Some of your colloquialisms are just great. Now, Michael, we got to finish.
I'm an optimist. I'm really an optimist, and I feel that this thing's going to work out just fine. And I think the United States as a nation and its problem with the recycling of the 70-year bankruptcy, which is in violation of many Supreme Court rulings on Ponzi schemes, in 1789 with the Jay Treaty, there was a 70-year payback on the debt. Then under Buchanan in 1859, it got recycled again. Then it got recycled again in 1999 under Clinton. So we're in the third go around, a fourth go around on a Ponzi scheme, on a multi-level scheme, which has been found by the Supreme Court to be illegal. and that it must be done away with. That's the debt, the 70-year debt recycled. That's what was the door-to-door thing where they would sell, my mother used to do it.
Bristle brushes?
Yeah, and all that stuff, right? And it was anyway, that was back when people actually knocked on doors and sold stuff. Well, no, this was a whole multi-level scheme where people would sell and they'd take benefit for finding other people. Amway, yeah, Amway, exactly. Sure. My mother was an Amway person, okay? So, but the Supreme Court found that the recycling of this Ponzi scheme was unconstitutional, and basically we're going to see a big chunk of the debt be wiped out, okay?
Absolutely. It's odious debt, and it's nothing more than paying a war debt that cannot be paid because of the interest rate, and so therefore it's odious.
That's 1789. That was Jay essentially said to the British, we want to have you release our sailors. They are private citizens, and we want you to release our ships. We want you to get your forts out of our territory, and we promise to pay you for reparations on the property taken. That was the Jay Treaty, in effect, and because it was not renewed, we ended up with the War of 1812.
Which is basically Britain mad that we attempted to get away from their control, and it was them asserting the fact that we did not get away from their control, and they came in and beat up our country, burned everything up, and all they did it for was sheer spite. Well,
you have Buchanan. You have Buchanan, essentially a traitor. Then you have all the Jesuit stuff, which was being pushed. You realize that. Jefferson Davis was highly trained, but everybody in his family were Jesuits. He was the president of the Confederacy.
Well, now, you keep saying Jesuits. Let's just use a different term. How about good Catholics, devoted priests?
Catholics. They're Jesuits. They are warriors. They are warriors. Have nothing to do with Catholicism.
Now, I just want to say, you sound like a conspiracy theorist, but you know what? You sound like a conspiracy theorist. I've been there. You're telling the truth. I have been there. I went right on up through the top. I met them all, and you know what? It's as bad as you're saying and worse. And let's remember that CIA stands for Catholics in Action. And let's remember it was a Jesuit.
That was Jesse Ventura said that. I remember his interview.
It was a Jesuit who founded and hosted the Council on Foreign Relations, which is basically the thing that has sold out American foreign policy since its inception, since the Inquiry was created by Woodrow Wilson and basically the robber barons and their lawyers. And it's just a mess that we're in. But what's really great is that you have optimism and you know all of this and that you're moving forward and you're being positive. We need to end this, and we're going to come back to you again. But what we want, Michael, can you round us off with a closing statement? Because I know you want to thank Chris. Because I want to thank you, Chris, because what you've done.
I don't want your thanks. I just want a platform in which I can tell you an update. That's all. Look, you guys, I feel like I'm associated with you because of all your good work, and I don't mean Catholic good work. I mean, I don't believe in good works. On a way to heaven. I'm against Father. There is no salvation within the church, excuse me, and that there's salvation to be found by maintaining a nation with borders and with sovereignty in devotion to God. That's the only salvation there is.
Wow. Michael, what do you have to say to close us out? And thank you again, Chris.
Well, even though Chris doesn't want thanks, I'm going to give it to you anyway. So thanks to you and your partners for picking up this information. I mean, we've been out there slogging away in the flora and the fauna for years, putting the data together in the hopes that one day it would find its way to the right people. And I consider you one of those right people, and I really appreciate it, as does our team and all of our shareholders. So whatever happens, it's a seed that's been planted, and let's pray that it falls on good soil.
Amen.
And we do consider you part of our group. Since the first conversation I had with you, Chris, I had to look up so many things you said, and I got such an education, and I brought it back to the conclave. So you are an unofficial or official member of the conclave. When you can get here and have some cheesecake and some cappuccino, you will be 100%
I love
official.
cheesecake. I know whether it be with cream cheese or ricotta. You know where cheesecake came from?
Cheese.
You know where it came from?
No.
Historically, it came from Greece. It came from Greece, and the first cake came out of Egypt because they had figured how to rise wheat.
Oh yeah,
and
yeast.
So it's very interesting.
That's right.
Yeast.
Yeah.
Yeast. Yeah.
There's still Egyptian yeast.
There isn't a topic that we can bring up that you don't know the history of it. That's amazing.
That's beautiful. That's why we're going to have more conversations with you. I'm going to sign off now, and thank you so much for all your great work. And Michael, thank you for being with us today. Chris, we will be chatting with you soon, and again, getting a great education. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.